Hey, it's Patriot Smoothie. I'm back for lunchtime, day 19 of the trial of Tamara, Lich, and Chris Barber. The days are all really just blending together on the 19th day of this mischief trial. Of course, there's other accusations. There's the counseling offenses and some other stuff, intimidation. But really, we've heard the theme of this testimony so far in the trial has been the honking of horns, the smelling of odors, idling engines, what have you, the observation of maybe some human waste in snowbanks, but in a lot of cases, the witnesses didn't directly, in fact, I would say the majority of cases, the witnesses didn't testify that they themselves saw that happen. So that's what I'm taking away from this. Is the theme is the honking of horns. Today we're back in court. It's a little bit less eventful than the previous few days, as we're off of the civilian witnesses now, concluding with Mr. Jorgensen yesterday, and now we're back with Officer Isabelle Cyr of the Ottawa Police Service. I heard that she's a detective now, so I'm not sure. I've heard that thrown around, but they do refer to her as Officer Cyr in court. She's a PLT officer. She was on the stand, you may recall, all the way back, I believe, on September 6th. She was one of the first witnesses. She was put off because there was a problem with the WhatsApp chats that turned out, because they didn't have them, but those WhatsApp chats turned out to be signal chats, and there has been a lot of discussion throughout this trial. I have reported to you continuously about the defense's efforts to get these chats, and I think there may have been just a little tiny bit of a collision right there. So there was an effort to do that, get these chats, and to compile them and to disclose them to defense. So that's really interesting, and I actually think there was a collision.
Yeah, there was. Yeah. Oh.
Yeah, sorry about that, folks. It appears there may have been a collision between an 18-wheeler and a box van right literally on the corner right here. Kind of threw me off, and I expect any moment now we will hear some sirens as the emergency crews make their way out. It doesn't look like a disaster. It doesn't appear as though there's anyone injured. We'll take a quick walk after we finish here. But with that being said, in the courtroom, we have Officer Isabelle Cyr today testifying. Now that we finally got those signal chats, as I've explained, there's been a lot of problems getting them. They're finally there. And inside those signal chats, there was additional emails and attachments. Those have also been disclosed. The defense argues that it's happening as the trial goes on. The Crown maintains that they've met all their disclosure obligations as this has gone on. So that's interesting as we now are moving ahead with the PLT witnesses. There's a few of them, as I understand, not just Officer Isabelle Cyr of the Ottawa Police and the police liaison teams. There's other officers from that who will come testify. Isabelle Cyr was one of the main information gatherers. She primarily communicated, I believe, with Danny Bulford and with Mr. Chris Gara. So she was testifying about that today, now that we can finally resume, now that the defense has all this disclosure. And what she testified about today was how there was plans, the maps. She doesn't know who made them. She did have them. She did send them to protesters, and that she testified she wouldn't have done that without the awareness or the approval of the police, the Ottawa Police, but she did not make those maps. And on these maps and routes was basically a description of where the trucks would go into Ottawa, the so-called staging areas, whether they were going on to Wellington, whether they were going on to the Sir John A. Macdonald Parkway, whether they were going on to the George Etienne Parkway, or whether they were going on to Rideau, based on whether they were coming east or west on the 417, whether they were coming from the 416, whether they were coming from Ottawa Route 5 and Gatineau side on the Quebec side, or whether they were coming from the 174, and whether they had a open trailer on their truck, whether they were a bob. We had a back and forth exchange there. Greenspan explaining the differences, asking what a bobcat, he meant like a bobtail was, but he said a bob, which is kind of funny. And he also joked that he's sorry to Chris that he's asking her that question when he knows that Chris is a trucking expert, obviously, but he's accused. But it was a bit of levity, as the judge likes to say. It's a bit of levity. There was a couple other jokes, so it was a pretty smooth sailing, rather dry comparatively, but a couple interesting points. So these maps and routes were made by police and showed the protesters where they were going to go, how they were going to get there. In one case, going up Kent, turning right onto Wellington, based on the directions of where the trucks were coming from, as I explained to you, and also based on whether they were an open trailer, whether they were a flatbed, whether they were a closed box, enclosed box. The closed boxes were routed to Wellington, which is kind of surprising to me. And as well, the capacities of each of these ways. We know that on the SJAM, there was over 2,000 vehicles, they said, that could fit there. I think it was 2,200 something. On Wellington, 38. I believe that was in the eastbound lane. And they were to park only on one lane on Wellington, the curb lane, leave the emergency lanes open, emergency lanes on SJAM, everywhere else. But one of the interesting points of inquiry that the defense was asking is, concerning these maps and routes, the Rideau, and Chris is making all kinds of faces, concerning the Rideau Street, I love teasing Chris, concerning the Rideau Street area on the maps and routes for the trucks that were coming from, I think that was for the 174, I'm not sure. On Rideau, They didn't indicate the capacity as they did for the other staging areas, nor did they indicate any kind of overflow. It just said Rideau Street. So, and it didn't say where exactly, if I recall. Like it had the boundaries. There was a boundary, but it was made with a red marker, I believe, with yellow arrows on the map. I haven't seen it indicating how the trucks were to get there. So Greenspun was basically saying, naturally, if they had got there and there was too many of them, they would have started towards Wellington. They would have gone north to the market of Rideau, which is where the Byward Market is. They would have gone south towards Sandy Hill. Ultimately, I believe the argument the defense is trying to make here is that because they didn't have that capacity instruction, they ended up going into the residential areas essentially because of a poor police plan. Officer Cyr couldn't testify. Now, that wasn't put directly to the witness. That's just my assumption, my thoughts based on where I think it's going right now. Now, Greenspun, when he put these questions, these were all in forms of questions, not statements to the witness. The witness would testify things like she didn't know, she didn't recall, she had no knowledge of it. In regards to this map, she said she wasn't she wasn't in the area, so she didn't see the police traffic, because the police, as we've heard testimony and we've seen videos of police here at the Freedom Convoy, when it was coming into Ottawa, they were waving people in. So she doesn't know how that traffic plan was implemented. She didn't witness it herself, but she did speak to a few things. A lot of I don't recall, and I find that she's a little bit quiet. Just a side note, some of her testimony is a little quiet. In previous witnesses, the judge in the court always explains, can you project your voice? Well, actually, to be fair, it's usually the Crown who asks their witness, speak to the back of the room as if you're speaking to the police officer in the back. There's a police officer who sits in the very back of the court, and they usually the Crown usually asks the witness to project their voice as if they're speaking to them. I'm in the second row back, immediately behind the accused, and I cannot really make out some of her words, so I hope that after we come back, maybe there's a reminder to speak a little bit louder in the court, even though it's a little emptier. That's another thing. I believe that this is the emptiest the court has been so far throughout this whole trial. I think that on day 19, people are just starting to lose interest. I think it could be safe to say, we could all believe how this is going in a certain way. We don't know for sure, but I think there is some writing on the wall. What that is, it's not very clear yet, but we will see soon, I think. With this witness, we testified, so we got into that with the maps and how the Rideau area on the map wasn't there. We talked about how police gave had intel communications on something called the Intersect Group. Officer Cyr couldn't directly speak to that because she wasn't part of it. There was another individual part of it at the police station. I believe she ended up naming her, but there's so many names to keep track of here, folks. But she did end up recalling the person's name. At first, she could only remember the face. Who deals at the Ottawa Police with Intersects, which is basically a group of police where they share intelligence with the partner policing agencies. And in that group, I think in late January 28th or so, there was an email sent from Intersect to the Ottawa Police. What was it, like a community events, some sort of inbox at like a planning events committee or something at the Ottawa Police. They had an inbox where they received this intelligence that they, Intersect, believed that this was going to be a significant event that could last for a significant amount of time. Now, Officer Cyr did say that she had access to that inbox, but she does not remember seeing it, or she maybe never did see it. It's one of the two possibilities, as Greenspun elaborated with her later. But so didn't see that, but that was something provided to police on or around that date. I believe also we heard such a thing from Inspector Lucas. The most interesting thing that came out in this portion of the morning testimony, I believe, was when Officer Cyr testified that she would go and she would negotiate. She would be out every day on the ground communicating with truckers, and some of them, she said, were more open than others. Sorry, I keep advancing on Chris. Some of them, she said, were more open than others, and then Greenspun put it to her that the purpose of her talking to them was to negotiate them shrinking the footprint. But after the first weekend, for some reason or the other, they were told they couldn't. We've been over this in the POEC. We've been over this earlier in this trial with Inspector Lucas. And Officer Cyr testified that on several occasions, she actually went to Inspector Lucas and asked if she could arrange to move, say, truck A to another street. And on several occasions, she testified that he told her no, and that he didn't elaborate on that. I believe she used the phrase that it was above her pay grade. She used that a couple times to describe some of the questions being asked of her by Mr. Greenspun here. That's where we're at this morning, that the PLT team was going up, according to testimony, to trucks, trying to move them to different streets, and being told no by police command, that they couldn't do it, not being elaborated as to why, but told no. We already know with Peter, former Ottawa Police Chief Peter Slowly, he said not 1 inch in regards to giving the protesters any moving grounds. That's what we heard this morning. I'll keep you updated throughout the day. As always, I'm Patriot Smoothie.